Welcome to Straight Talk for Real Life, produced by Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. If you're like me, there is nothing more satisfying than a great meal. Am I right? But did you know that what you eat can affect how you feel? It's true. Your diet may be affecting your mood. In fact, certain foods may be just what the doctor ordered for treating things like depression, anxiety, even PTSD and Alzheimer's disease. Stick around because on the menu today, we're going to share the secret recipe for feeling great. Hello there and welcome to Straight Talk for Real Life. I'm Bob Peacock. We've all been there. We try to eat fairly healthy meals, but then you get stressed from work or depressed and anxious just from watching the news. And many of us turn to our favorite comfort foods like macaroni and cheese, a bag of potato chips, perhaps a glass of wine or a dish of ice cream. Am I the only one? Well, as comforting as these foods may sound, they might be making us feel even worse. Today, we're going to talk with an expert about how eating certain foods can impact your mood and even your brain function. My guest today is Dr. Uma Naidoo, a physician and faculty member of Harvard Medical School. Dr. Uma is a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, a nutrition expert, a professional chef, and one of the pioneers in a fairly new field called nutritional psychiatry. It's all about how different foods can affect your brain and your behavioral health. She also established the Nutritional and Lifestyle Psychiatry program at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, the first clinic of its kind in the United States. And she has also written an international bestseller titled This Is Your Brain on Food, an indispensable guide to the surprising foods that fight depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD, ADHD, and more. In some countries, the book is simply titled The Food-Mood Connection. Dr. Uma, welcome. It is such an honor to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Bob. I'm very excited to speak to you as well.
The food-mood connection is a fascinating subject, and I learned so much from reading your book. When many of us think about making changes to our diet, we do it because we need to lose weight or we need to improve our physical health because maybe we have prediabetes or high cholesterol. We rarely think about making diet changes to improve our mental well-being. As people are starting to hear about nutritional psychiatry for the first time, what do you want them to know?
I think that the most important thing is to appreciate that there is this connection. You see, like you so eloquently mentioned, Bob, people don't make this connection. Yet how many times have we had a headache? And what do? We might take a Tylenol or another pill to relieve that headache. And what do you do with the pill? You grab a glass of water, you take the pill, you swallow it, drink a sip of water, and you probably forget about it, hoping your headache goes away. But think about that for a second. The pill goes to your stomach. It goes through your digestive system to your gut, and it relieves your headache, which is usually around the neural tissue in your brain. Food is not that dissimilar. The mechanisms may vary, and it's related to the gut-brain connection, which is a newer advance in medical science over the last decade and a half. So what I want people to know is that food really does impact how you feel emotionally, and we should be paying attention to how easy it is to be eating differently for mental health.
Your book is part self-help book, part diet book, and I mean that in a good way, not the fad diet way, and part cookbook. It has specific information on foods or even spices, which surprised me, that we should and shouldn't eat if we're feeling different behavioral symptoms or disorders. On a Harvard Health blog, a doctor wrote an entry that compared the brain to an expensive car. And it said, to keep your brain running smoothly, you've got to give it premium fuel. I know this can get really complicated really quickly, but you explain it so well. So how does what we eat affect our mood? The connection between gut and brain actually started back when we were embryos. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct. It turns out that the gut and brain are two separate organs, but in the embryo, as our bodies are developing, they arise from the exact same tissue. So they are actually connected because of their origin. Then, as they form these two organs in life and they separate, they are still connected by our 10th cranial nerve, vagus nerve, which I like to call a two-way superhighway, which works in a bidirectional way. This nerve connects the brain to the gut and the gut to the brain and allows for chemical messages to be sent all the time, every day. So that's another point of communication. But then many people know of serotonin, the happiness hormone.
Right.
And it is, serotonin that is being targeted in medications such as selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And yet 90 to 95% of serotonin, as well as the receptors, are in the gut. So it's important for people to understand and put those factors together. And if someone has ever been prescribed a medication like Prozac or Zoloft, which is an SSRI, they may often develop some gastrointestinal side effects when they stop that medication. This is because of the location of those serotonin receptors. So it just helps to fill in the picture for people and starts to impress upon them the connection that the food we eat starts to impact our emotional health as well.
I was so surprised. 95% of your body's serotonin is made in the gut and only 5% in the brain. I thought it was the other way around.
I think we all did until research showed otherwise. And the gut-brain connection, the emerging science around this gut microbiome has really emerged in the last decade and a half. We've known about serotonin and the receptors for some time, but connecting it with the gut-brain science has been newer. If doctors went to medical school more than a couple of decades ago, they were not learning about the gut microbiome because the science simply hadn't followed to that point. And yet Hippocrates made this connection eons ago. So it's great that, the research and scientific data is now being filled in for us to help us explain that.
So is chocolate a mood enhancer like many of us hope it is?
Chocolate is, but it depends on the type of chocolate. We unfortunately are not talking about the candy bars that many of us are used to eating. We're really referring to natural dark chocolate, usually 70, 75% or darker, because the process in which it's made is rich in cacao flavonols, which are great for the brain. It's rich in serotonin, magnesium, and other nutrients that actually make it a pretty healthy food. Unfortunately, I think it's getting one's palate used to that flavor and beginning to appreciate it, because many Americans are really, as part of that standard American diet, are used to candy and candy bars, which are very different and not the type of chocolate we're referring to.
Oh, okay. Okay. Does the food mood theory work with everyone, or do foods affect us differently depending on things like ethnicity or whether we're male or female, young or old?
Yes, studies have definitely shown some differences, but what large part of it, the way that we understand it at the moment, goes to the gut microbiome, because everyone's gut microbiome is like a thumbprint. So you may have a different response to the same healthy food that someone else, say, tolerates and does well eating. So it's very important, as we've emerged with all of the science in nutritional psychiatry, to really have personalized nutritional psychiatry treatment plans. So, for example, I had a mother and daughter, biologically related, genetically related, all of that, who couldn't tolerate the same healthy food. One loved it and ate it every day. The other could not. So, it's always important to personalize the recommendations to that individual. Once I understand what their symptoms are, what they enjoy eating, and what the gaps are in their nutrition, and the sort of nutrients that they're missing that they could be eating more of.
Why aren't more doctors talking about it to their patients? Is there any question that adopting certain diet changes will positively impact the brain?
So let's start with the second part of that question first. There is, while we never want to overstate scientific evidence, I do feel that just in the book, This Is Your Brain on Food, that I penned, I looked at close to 900 scientific references and I included more than 550, so that the reader felt that everything they were reading about could be referenced and that there was actual scientific data behind this. And my strongest reason for doing that, Bob, was to help people understand that this is no longer a soft science. This is no longer just something we are guiding or chatting about. This is actually followed by scientific evidence. all of which I see growing as we move forward, as more research is done, as we understand more about the gut microbiome as well. So that was, I think helps us understand the framework, while not saying that, food is going to cure you of a severe mental illness. There may be times when someone is actively suicidal, has mania, bipolar disorder, or acute psychosis or suicidal, and they may need acute treatment in an emergency room. They might need medication. A doctor really needs to evaluate that. But what I am saying is that food, nutrition, nutrients are a low hanging fruit that we can absolutely use, whether we've been to see a doctor, spoken to a therapist. Maybe we're just feeling a little blue. Maybe we're just feeling ongoing anxiety and angst during the pandemic. Maybe we're just not sleeping well. About more than 1/3 of Americans are not sleeping well, especially over the past few years with all the ongoing anxiety that has continued. So food is powerful, and I think if it's one thing people should take away, it's that they can start to use it as a tool. Now, coming to the first part of your question as to why physicians are not adopting this, I think that newer ideas, newer medical science takes longer for more physicians to adopt. So, for example, functional medicine doctors, lifestyle medicine doctors, even cardiologists, many are seeing the value of making nutrition and dietary changes to really impact things like cardiac illness. Heart disease is still the number one killer in the United States. Conditions like type 2 diabetes. And I think that it will be a while before all psychiatrists follow. But, my mission in pioneering this field in the United States is really to start to help us integrate this information so that we, in addition to maybe pulling out that prescription pad, because the medication may be needed, I won't deny that. However, there are also these other holistic, functional, and integrated approaches we should be offering patients. And I have to tell you, Bob, a lot that just comes from my own cultural background, how I grew up and how I was raised, just integrating information from Ayurveda, from mindfulness, from yoga, from meditation, and healthy eating, in addition to the hardcore scientific evidence. So bringing that together, I feel, will take time for more psychiatrists to adopt, but also I'm encouraged that it's a growing movement.
Very good. Can you describe some aha moments in your career as a nutritional psychiatrist?
Bob, I've told the story before, but it's one of my favorites simply because it so brings the point home and really was an aha moment for me. Early on in my career, I really had begun to question why in my training, as learning everything about psychiatric medications, but nothing about whether my patients were exercising, what were they doing for any mindfulness practice, were they, drinking enough water, how were they eating. And a patient very early on in my career kind of came in after I prescribed the medication maybe a few weeks before and was pretty upset with me. And being a timid younger resident, I was a little taken aback, and he was accusing me of causing him to gain weight. Now, I could see with the medical chart on the computer in front of me that it was not the case, and that the data was very clear. He had already was in the overweight zone, and so this medication had not added weight to him. But I allowed him to vent, and then I noticed he was carrying a large 20-ounce size of Dunkin' Donuts coffee. Dunkin' Donuts is a favorite in Boston, and I pointed to it, and I said, "Well, Bill, I understand that you're upset, but tell me what you put in your coffee today." And he revealed that he had put a quarter cup of processed creamer and 8 teaspoons of sugar. So I sat him down at the computer and we calculated it. While I'm not a huge calorie counter, because I think the source of food, portion control, things like that are much more relevant in my practice, I did use this calculation to prove a point to him. And when he realized the number of empty calories he was consuming in that one cup of coffee that he was drinking, and sometimes he had more than one a day, his eyes lit up. And he brightened and he said, "Oh," and that really was my aha moment, because I could see the fact that I was getting through to him and that he felt empowered to make a decision about what he put in his coffee, how he could potentially get rid of wasting these calories, having a healthier choice in what he added to his coffee or not. And it was very powerful. I always refer back to it because I thought to myself, wow, if he understood from a simple calculation, because we discussed the nutrition of what he was drinking in his coffee, and he saw how powerful that was. What if more of my patients knew this?
Yes.
And what if they decided they could make some changes as to what maybe changing from a breakfast cereal to a healthier oatmeal, or from a processed food or a donut at breakfast to a more wholesome chia pudding or something more nutritious. What would happen? And that's really what encouraged me along.
This podcast has listeners from all over the world, many different cultures. Are there different cultural findings in relation to food and mood?
Studies of the Mediterranean diet and the Mediterranean eating pattern has been associated with certain countries and areas of the world. I think that as science emerges and as more research is done, we will make more of those associations. But certainly, this is an interesting and burgeoning area of research because you see studies, coming out from Japan, coming out from Italy, coming out from Australia, coming out from the United States. So I think that as this emerges and as we study more, we'll be able to start to make those connections as well.
I know the Western diet or the American diet here in the United States is probably one of the unhealthiest choices because of our reliance on processed foods. That are really high in flours and sugars and chemicals that stimulate reward centers of our brain, make us crave more of them. But this kind of diet may be causing some behavioral issues as well. Is that right?
That is correct. Our reliance on processed, ultra processed junk foods, fast foods, artificial sweeteners, processed vegetable oils, all of these have initially been associated with things like cardiac disease, type 2 diabetes, really people's concern about their waistlines. But it turns out there's science connecting all of these as well to damage the microbiome and development of inflammation in the gut, which leads to inflammation in the brain, and an uptick of mental health symptoms. So it's really no longer just the standard American diet in relation to, say, type 2 diabetes. It's much more extensive and now understood that these are problematic for conditions like depression, anxiety, cognitive disorders, even sleep.
There are probably a lot of people listening who may not feel depressed or anxious at all, but they simply want to know what they should be eating to enhance their brain function or to make them happier. So, if we could, let's get really practical. What are like the top 3 things that we need to incorporate into a healthy mental diet that can make us feel happier?
The first and foremost, that I ask people to do is to swap. I use the word swap. So I ask them to swap something out because during the last several years, people have picked up, and I hear this every day, have picked up some unhealthy habit that they wish that they could get rid of again.
Mm-hmm.
So the stress of the pandemic, people are leaning into the ice cream every night or that extra glass of wine, or as you mentioned that as we began discussing this, I asked them to swap one habit that they've encountered or begun to notice in themselves, and that's important because that's usually not the healthiest habit. And if they know that, it's helpful for them to figure out what can I do instead of that, bowl or 2 of ice cream at night or that extra glass of wine. The second is to really lean into a plant-rich diet. And why do I say this? It's just no longer what your doctor says about eating a leafy green salad or eating the colors of the rainbow, because there's really excellent science behind this now telling us that nutrients like folate in leafy greens are very important for brain health. Low folate levels are associated with depression. The plant polyphenols from the different colors of fruits and vegetables. My favorite fruit being berries because of the rich anthocyanins and things like blueberries. And all the colors of the vegetables, the different color peppers, the cucumbers, you name it. Try something that you enjoy eating. All of those have plant polyphenols that interact with the gut microbes, and they form really positive, healthy substances in the gut. These substances very simply help our brain health ultimately because we now understand that there is this connection between the gut and the brain. So leaning into plant-rich foods, another reason to eat them is we get fiber. Many Americans obsess about how many grams of protein am I eating, but very many of us are getting enough protein. It's fiber that we're lacking. Large, database research studies have shown that only 1 in 10 Americans eat enough fruit and vegetables in their diet. And fruit, vegetables, beans, nuts, seeds, legumes, healthy whole grains are actually the best sources of fiber. Cannot get fiber from animal seafood proteins. So just another reason to lean into some plant-rich foods on your plate. The third nutrient is omega-3 fatty acids, because they have been proven and shown to help mood, to lower anxiety, and you get these from things like fatty fish, wild sockeye salmon, anchovies, sardines. Plant-based sources include things like walnuts, chia seeds, flax seeds. I will just say, Bob, that the shorter chain omega-3 and the plant-based sources is less available for that conversion in the brain. So I always say that if you don't eat seafood, you may want to consider something like an algal oil supplement, because you also get rich sources of omega-3s and things like sea algae and sea vegetables. So those are just a few ways to get started. There's several others. Some of my favorites are spices. People underestimate and don't even realize the power of spices, things like turmeric with a pinch of black pepper. The rosemary are all very powerful in terms of our brain health. So, first swap out something bad and then start to add in some of these foods. And of course, in my book, This Is Your Brain on Food, each chapter has a list of foods to embrace and foods to avoid. So there are many, there are over 200 foods in the book that you can lean on for improving your mental health.
You mentioned the foods that we should be eating more of, the plant-rich diet, the fibers, the fatty acids. What are just a few things that negatively affect our brain that we should be avoiding?
One of the things that people don't realize is that they may be trying to cut back on sugar and they move to sugar-free or low-sugar products, but many of those have artificial sweeteners. For the most part, artificial sweeteners are disruptive to the gut microbiome and not good for our mental well-being. So that's a big one, because people sometimes move from a soda to diet soda.
Right.
And I commend them in trying to come off the sugar. So that's the right direction to move in, but it can also drive certain symptoms like anxiety. Another large category that you won't be surprised by is the processed, ultra-processed junk foods and fast foods. Fast food French fries have added sugar, but you don't taste that. The research and development has gone to the extent to know that they must be flavored in a way that we crave them, that they have added sugars in them. So, many people don't realize they go through a drive-through, they upsize their fries, and then when they have the larger size, they finish the whole bag. These are because the foods are engineered to be hyper palatable, and they lead to cravings. So that's one of the issues with having your diet really only be fast foods. Another is processed vegetable oils, which are pro-inflammatory to your gut. And another category is fried foods. We know that those are less healthy, and trans fats in sort of shelf-stable baked goods that people that we often are eating.
Mm-hmm. It's difficult for people to change bad habits. We've talked about it, but changing your diet seems like something that you can do. And if people want to feel happier and have healthier brains, how is the best way to get started to see if certain foods are going to improve your mood and make you feel better?
Start slowly and steadily and build from there. So if you are noticing that you're feeling a little blue, a little down, start with the foods in the chapter on depression and start to add a few. Look at the list, add a few that you like. Maybe you like seafood. Maybe you like a really great salad every day. But whatever it is, you can start building it in as a slow and steady habit. And work from there. Start with one thing you can change. Maybe it's adding in a spice that you haven't used. And then I would say every few days or every week, build in an additional habit to watch and see how you feel. Because ultimately, my goal in working with someone is that the habits they start to build in become part of their lifestyle. And they automatically make these better choices when they go to eat out, when they go to the supermarket, and they incorporate it as a healthy habit rather than something, which is more of that fad diet. Let's lose 5 pounds before a family wedding or an award show, or, the way that things like that get portrayed. So it's really about sustaining these as part of your lifestyle.
And if people decide to make the change in their diets, how long does it typically take before we'll see an improvement in our moods?
Very often, the relationship between food and the gut, we understand from research that the gut takes about 28 days to heal. But in reality, in clinical practice, when people are starting to make these slow and steady habit changes towards healthier foods that they're eating, I've seen people call me up within a week and say that they're starting to sleep better, they're feeling less brain fog at work in the afternoon, and notice symptoms about feeling even happier or more uplifted, less down, less anxious. So although we know that proper gut healing takes about 28 days in the average person, the reality is that I've really noticed people feeling these changes quite a lot sooner.
I know that you really don't believe in specific kinds of diets, but what are your thoughts on being vegetarian versus eating meat? Is one better than the other when it comes to behavioral health?
This really goes back to the uniqueness of the microbiome. And you are right, Bob. I am diet agnostic, meaning that I feel that someone coming in to see me, my role really is to help them improve whatever diet they're eating, not to tell them to give up one diet or pick up the next. The issue is that people are unique. My microbiome may be different from the next person, and we know this. So certain studies have shown that if you're a vegetarian, maybe there are some levels of depression. But other studies have also shown that a plant-rich diet alleviates depression. And this again goes back to the state of nutrition science, the research. I think on any day that I quote something, someone else can quote the opposite. Therefore, the way forward in nutritional psychiatry is really to find the plan, the foods, the nutrients, as I like to say, the nutritional psychiatry plate that works for you, your unique microbiome, and that will alleviate your symptoms. And that's why it's become so highly personalized. So no, I don't believe that eating meat or giving it up will be, the cure or the solution. It's really finding the proper almost the proper elements of food that you need on your plate, the proper food groups, the nutrients that you're missing, the vitamins that you need, and some of those basic pillars that I speak about that you may need to fill in to improve your mental well-being.
Talking about these different kinds of diets, the South Beach diet, keto diet, the Atkins diet, Mediterranean diet, they go on, and some of them have become quite controversial. Some said that fats are bad and carbohydrates are good, but today you read more that low carb and high fat diet, like a keto diet,
Right.
is even more successful for treating things like anxiety. Why the change, and is that true?
It comes back to personalization. It comes back to the microbiome. Certainly, the ketogenic diet, there's some data in certain conditions. It was originally used in seizure disorders. I speak about it in my book related to bipolar disorder in certain cases and certain conditions. It is not, though, a one size fits all approach. So, there have been some case studies and individuals who did well on ketogenic diet, but this is not globally accepted as yet. I will say there's ongoing research, and we need to review that research as it comes out because I think it's very promising. But here's my issue with any extreme diet, and I'm not specifically picking on the ketogenic diet. I'm just saying that when you ask people to exclude certain food groups and add an excess of another food group, this kind of imbalance is what often gets certainly my clients into trouble, because they feel they can't eat something or they have to eat something else, and these rules get us into these diet wars and food dilemmas that confuse people more and more. So rather than have them undergo all of that, working with them on a one-to-one individual basis and trying to figure out what helps them and their condition becomes important. So there are some case studies in the ketogenic diet. There's information where some doctors will say that is a cure for something. I think creating hard and fast rules is very, very difficult to do, and we really shouldn't be. We shouldn't be at that point until we are 100% sure. And I don't think that medical science is ever that way. So, giving careful recommendations, consulting with their peers, understanding the research, and individuals knowing that they have a personalized recommendation becomes very important to their health.
We hear more and more about dementia. Is there something we should be eating to keep our brains healthy and ward off dementia? Is there something general?
So one of the general things is to add in some spices, to turmeric with a pinch of black pepper, rosemary have some good evidence. The other is I'm feeling that I think the mistake we're making with cognitive disorders is that we're thinking about it as a condition in our parents, our grandparents, and older folk. We are part of that discussion because the issue with the things that we can change in cognitive health, if we're eating poorly and we've developed neuroinflammation, inflammation and neuroinflammation really being seen as the basis to ongoing changes that we can alter by how we're eating. We don't have a medication cure for Alzheimer's, but we certainly know that reversing neuroinflammation by how we're eating and changing our diet is very powerful and helps. So right there is a way that we can start to improve our chances for better cognitive health just by how we're eating. So anti-inflammatory foods, a plant-rich diet, adding in the right spices, keeping active. It's like I said, this is also holistic and mindfulness, meditation, spending time outdoors, exercise. All of these things become important too.
You wrote that vitamins play key roles in preventing and easing depression, and the most important are folate, B9, and B12. Do you recommend supplements to your patients for a healthier brain, or is it better to get those vitamins by eating the right foods?
It's always better to get these nutrients in foods and to try that first, but that doesn't mean there isn't a place for supplements. For example, saffron has a lot of good evidence for improvement of mood, but the amount of saffron you use when you're cooking is much less than would have been used in the studies in a supplement form. So there's a good example of when you might speak to your doctor about a saffron supplement, because there's really a good amount of evidence for improvement in mood. So I think there's a place for supplementation because our diets are never perfect. And I also ask people to start with food first and then fill in the gaps with supplements they might need by speaking to their doctors, checking if they are low in a certain vitamin or missing a certain nutrient in their diet that can be replaced through a supplement.
Yes, I read in your book that, maybe I've heard you speak of before, but you said that one shouldn't just assume that you need more magnesium or a certain vitamin and just start taking supplements, that you really should talk to your doctor and test, don't guess.
That's exactly right, Bob. I always say test, don't guess, because we don't know what our level of magnesium is until we check it. And the body is, the body and the nutrients, the electrolytes, the vitamins and minerals, the macronutrients, everything needs to work in harmony. So without knowing that there's something out of balance, we shouldn't just reach out and take a supplement. Because something like magnesium is involved in about 300 biochemical reactions in the body. So these are not things to be taken lightly, and this is where food can be an easy way to start introducing a certain nutrient. So, in Chapter 11, I go through a list of brain foods, the acronym brain foods, but I also list different vitamins and where you can find these in food. And the idea is to start to incorporate these into your diet slowly and steadily, not to only eat a certain food because of a certain vitamin. Mix them in a more general way as you enjoy foods that you eat. That's really the best way to make these habits sustainable.
Can you speak to the home nutrition test to see what people are allergic to? You read about them, you hear about them. Are they a good idea?
The information is variable. One should always really be discussing this with your doctor. And if you're concerned about an allergy, you really should speak to an allergist, and your primary care doctor can refer you to one. This is because tests done in the hospital are looking for certain antigens and tests that they will perform and do. Maybe an at-home test is a way to get started, but they may be unreliable, and only a doctor can help you interpret that information. So I think the wise thing to do if you're concerned is to make sure that you have a physician involved. Test, don't guess, and do it that way, so that you are certain of an information that you have. Because an allergy is a very serious thing, and an allergy can actually cause death. So you want to be careful about these things, and it's the reason that people carry an EpiPen, because an EpiPen can prevent death from a life-threatening peanut allergy, for example. So always best to just include your physician in this discussion.
Very good. Any closing thoughts when it comes to food and your mental health? What's the most important thing that you want people to understand?
That the food you eat is in some ways more powerful than medications you can take. There is a place for medication, and you should discuss that with your doctor, but food is in your home, it is within your reach. It is something that you eat. You eat several meals a day, and you need to almost incorporate food and nutrition as part of your armor to improve and fortify your own mental health.
Dr. Uma Naidoo, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. This is going to help so many people.
Thank you so much, Bob. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Obviously, we can't control our genes or certain things that happen to us in our lives that can affect our mental health. But as Dr. Uma said, diet is only one tool in the toolbox. It shouldn't replace medication if needed. So if you're feeling depressed or anxious, talk to a medical professional. But obviously, there are things that we can and should be doing to optimize our health and our happiness. Dr. Uma Naidoo's book, once again, is titled, This is Your Brain on Food, an indispensable guide to the surprising foods that fight depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD, ADHD, and more. And it's just another tool that you can use to improve your mental well-being. Many people cannot believe how much better they feel both physically and emotionally when they make changes to their diets. HPE's For Real Life initiative offers a wide range of options to help you learn about this and many other things that can impact your mental well-being and happiness. As always, our Employee Assistance Program is there for both team members and their families. And many different wellness resources are easily available to you online whenever you need them. If you're outside the U.S., you'll find those on HPE's Global Wellness page. And if you're in the U.S., you'll find them on HPE Wellness. My thanks once again to Dr. Uma Naidoo for sharing her expertise today. And most of all, thank you for listening. We hope you'll recommend our podcast to a friend or colleague. Until next time, please take care of yourself. Let's talk again soon.